Brazil is a very efficient and unbureaucratic country. Well, yes and no. It depends on what you're doing. Now, I'm sure a lot of people are watching this going, what is he talking about? And yes, there are many things here in Brazil which can be really difficult to do, slow, very bureaucratic. But then there are certain things I actually think are quicker, easier, and more efficient to do here in Brazil compared to Europe and the US. So let's start with those things which I actually think are better, quicker, and easier to do here in Brazil. And the first one is making payments or bank transfers. So here in Brazil, we've got this payment system called PIX, P-I-X. And it was developed by the Brazilian central bank. It allows you to make bank transfers or payments instantly to someone just using their mobile number, email, or tax ID. And I think PIX is great. And I was actually a bit shocked when I arrived in Brazil and I saw this PIX system and how easy it was to use and how quick it was. And the fact that all large and medium-sized banks offer it. You can use it during the day, in the evening, on weekends and holidays. And it doesn't cost you anything either because there are no fees. And it's so quick to set up the payment as well because you don't need someone's sort code, account number, or IBAN. And there are no questions about why you're making the payment, which lots of banks love to ask because of money laundering risk. And these banks in Sweden and UK also love to ask, are you sure you want to make this payment? This could be a fraud. There's none of that. You just type in the person's email or phone number, click two buttons, and you've transferred the money, and it arrives at the other end in a few seconds. And it's not just me that likes PIX. Apparently 75% of the Brazilian population have used PIX. So it's super popular, and people use it to transfer money, but also to pay for things in stores as well. So when you get to the checkout, you can just scan a barcode with your mobile, and you can make a PIX transfer to the store. And in a few seconds, the store has confirmation that you've made this payment. And it's become so popular that the credit card companies are getting worried about it. So MasterCard and Visa have filed complaints with the government because it's saying it's an unfair competition because the system was launched by the Brazilian central bank. And yeah, basically the credit card companies have started seeing their revenues drop in Brazil. So they basically want it stopped so they can keep making lots of money. So yeah, PIX has become a massive thing here in Brazil. Now in Sweden, the UK, and the US, you have similar things. You've got Swish in Sweden, and in the US you've got Zelle, Venmo, PayPal, and these payment services are similar. However, PIX is at a much larger scale because you can use it basically with all financial institutions in Brazil, and also the majority of businesses and stores as well, except PIX. While similar payment systems in Sweden and the US and so on aren't accepted by all financial institutions and all businesses. So yeah, I think Brazilians should be really proud of how well PIX has been implemented here in Brazil, and I was really impressed by it when I started using it. And another thing which is really efficient and very impressive here in Brazil is the voting system. Now, this is a bit controversial because there's lots of conspiracy theories, it's been politicized a lot, but I'm not going to get into any of that. But the actual voting system I was really impressed with. So Brazil uses electronic voting machines, and they were implemented back in 2000, 2001, and these are used throughout the country. And it's a really quick and easy system to use. So the voter verifies their identity with biometrics, and they cast their vote using a numeric keypad, so they type in the candidate's number, and then a picture comes up of that candidate, and they just press confirm that they want to vote for them. And because everything's electronic, there are no paper ballots. And so what that means is that the votes can be counted really quickly, and the result of the election is known in a couple of hours. And so you haven't got this thing of thousands of people counting paper ballots, and they're taking the whole night and the next day before you know the election result. And then sometimes in other countries, when the voting's really close, they want to recount all the paper ballots again, and it's a real mess. But you don't have that in Brazil because everything's electronic. So yeah, having lived in Sweden, the UK, the US, I've never seen a voting system that is this quick and efficient as the Brazilian one. And then another thing which I found really easy and efficient here in Brazil is buying medication. So yeah, if you're feeling a bit sick here in Brazil, you can just go to one of the millions of pharmacies that they have here in Brazil. I mean, I've never seen so many pharmacies in a country before. So I mean, the little town that I live in, I think there are like, I don't know, 7 or 8 pharmacies in this town. God knows how they all survive, but they do somehow. So yeah, you won't experience any problems of finding a pharmacy. And also a lot of the pharmacies are open 24/7 as well. So if you wake up during the night feeling sick, you can go to a pharmacy. I mean, yeah, a few years ago, I didn't see the point of why pharmacies were open during the night. But then since my daughter was born, I really appreciate it. Because now and again, your child gets a high temperature and you run out of the Tylenol or whatever you need. So yeah, once or twice I've had to go to the pharmacy during the night. And so that's a lot better than in Sweden, for example, where pharmacies are just open during the day, they're closed on Sundays, holidays, and so on. So yeah, in Sweden, if you haven't stocked on the medicines, you can get totally screwed there, that's for sure. But that's not the only good thing. The other thing is that you can buy a lot more medicines at pharmacies here in Brazil without a prescription. So yeah, you don't need to book an appointment with a GP first in order for them to write you a prescription in order to get medicine, which isn't very strong, and you should be able to buy without having to go to a doctor. Now, obviously, there are some medicines here in Brazil which you need prescription for, so antibiotics and other strong things. But there seems to be more common sense here in Brazil that the medicines, which, aren't very dangerous and so on, you'd be able to buy without going to a doctor. Because if you go to the pharmacist, especially in the UK and Sweden, and you say, oh, I've got this pain or I'm not feeling very well, and you haven't got a prescription for anything, all the pharmacist says is drink lots of water and take paracetamol. That's the only thing they say. It doesn't matter if you're complaining about a headache, a temperature, or you've chopped your arm off and you're bleeding everywhere. The pharmacist still says the same thing. Drink lots of water, take a paracetamol, or go to the GP and get a prescription. So yeah, that's definitely something I think is a lot simpler and a lot more efficient here in Brazil. And then another thing, which is kind of connected, is seeing a doctor or your GP is a lot easier and more efficient here in Brazil. So, I mean, in Sweden and especially in the UK, it can take weeks to book an appointment with a GP, a general practitioner, which can be really frustrating because if you're in pain and it's slightly urgent, then you have to go to the hospital, the accident and emergency, and you have to sit there for hours upon hours in order to see a doctor. Now in Brazil, my experience is a lot better. So in my town, we have this drop-in clinic, which is just run by the local government. And yeah, within 30 minutes to 1 hour, I can see a GP. And it's really good and really efficient, and it's open on Sundays and holidays as well. And yeah, I just found it so much better than in the UK and Sweden. But one thing I will say is that it's not like that in the whole of Brazil. So yeah, don't move to Brazil and think that, there are these wonderful drop-in clinics everywhere in every town in Brazil. That's definitely not the case. Because yeah, I've experienced some really bad GP surgeries here in Brazil, especially in the bigger cities where you turn up and you have to sit there for hours upon hours just waiting to see a doctor. I remember one time taking my daughter to one of these drop-in clinics in a major city, and yeah, we sat there for hours. And then the even more shocking thing was the person next to us was sitting there because they'd been bitten by a bat and they were bleeding on the neck, and I was just shocked about how they had to sit there for hours as well waiting for treatment. I mean, we just come there because my daughter has injured her foot a bit, so it wasn't anything urgent for us. But then the person next to us, I thought was pretty badly injured, and they still had to wait for hours. So yeah, what I would say in general, the public GP surgeries in the smaller towns, especially the towns in the south which have quite a strong German culture, they seem to be a bit more organized. And my impression is that in general, they have better public health services. But even if you're in an area which doesn't have a very good public health service, you can always use a private health system, in general a lot better compared to Sweden and many other countries. So I use a health service provider called Unimed, which is very big. I pay about $100 per month for me, and you can see a private GP or a specialist quite quickly. But if you don't have private health insurance, it's still quick and cheap to see a doctor. So I mean, in my area, most private GPs and specialists, they charge between 200 reais and 300 reais for a consultation. So that is $37 to $56. And if for most of them, if you call them up and say you're willing to pay privately, you can see them like the next day or in 2 or 3 days. And then you just pay like $50 and you're seeing a specialist and you're getting treated. And yeah, there's no way you can do that in Sweden. It's going to cost a lot more. It's going to cost, hundreds of dollars. And usually you have to wait a few weeks in order to get an appointment as well, especially with a specialist. So basically, seeing a doctor here in Brazil is just a lot quicker and easier. And then another thing which is very quick and easy, I'm not sure if it's a good thing or not, is buying alcohol. So it's really easy to buy alcohol here in Brazil. So you can buy it in the supermarket, and they're open late in the evenings, they're open the whole weekend. And then you're also able to buy alcohol in petrol stations and gas stations, which I find a bit strange that they're allowed to do that. And then they also have delivery services, which just specialize in delivering beer and alcohol to your house as well. So yeah, if you're home and it's late on a Sunday evening or something, and you're like, oh, I just want a beer. So yeah, you can order from these delivery services, or you just go to the local petrol station and buy a beer there. And yeah, none of this is available in Sweden, that's for sure. So in Sweden, you can only buy alcohol, apart from the really weak beer. Weak beer you can buy in the supermarket. But if you want to buy stronger beer, wine, spirits, then you can only buy it from a government-owned store called Systembolaget. And that's only open from like 10 to 6, Monday to Friday, and then Saturday mornings. And that's it. So if you're trying to buy alcohol at any other time of the day, then you just can't buy it apart from the low alcohol beers that you can find in the supermarket. So yeah, moving from Sweden to Brazil, that was a major shock about how easy it is to buy alcohol. Whether this is a good thing or not, I guess that's up for debate. But I think in general, more freedom for the consumer is a good thing. And then finally, another thing which is a lot more efficient here in Brazil, which I guess is a bit of a strange one, is funerals. So here in Brazil, when someone sadly passes away, then usually the funeral is like in the next day or the next 2 days. And so they happen super quick. So I mean, I was shocked when my wife's aunt passed away, and I was like, oh, okay, so we'll have a funeral in a few weeks, maybe a month or two, which is what happens in Sweden and the UK as well. So for there, it takes a long time for a funeral to be organized because the venue, the church, is fully booked, and there's lots of things that needs to be done before the funeral can happen. But here in Brazil, it's super quick. And you've got this culture as well here in Brazil of people just dropping everything and going to the funeral the next day when they get the invite. But it's not just Brazil that has quick funerals. I know that, for example, Colombia also has funerals very quickly. I think Spain, Portugal as well, I think. So I'm not sure if it's a Latin thing or the fact that the climates are hotter. But yeah, I was very shocked when I went to the first funeral here in Brazil. Okay, so those were some of the things that I found more efficient and easier to do here in Brazil. But then there are some other things which are a bit less quick and easy to do here in Brazil. So I'll just mention a few. So the first one is getting contracts signed and getting copies of official documents like marriage certificate, birth certificate. So for most of these things, you need to go to a notary office here in Brazil. So if you need to sign a contract, then most of the time you need to go to a notary office and get your signature authenticated on the contract. And then if you need to provide a copy of a marriage certificate, birth certificate or something, then you need to get that copy authenticated also from a notary office. Now in Sweden you don't need to do any of that. Your certificates and stuff are saved on a digital database, so you don't need to make copies. And also if you sign a contract, you can just get a lawyer, an accountant or something to witness your signature. So yeah, it's definitely a lot easier and quicker to do in Sweden. And yeah, I found it really annoying having to constantly go to these notary offices and yeah, stand in a queue and pay them money in order to do this, that's for sure. And then another thing which in general is more complicated here in Brazil is starting a business. So here in Brazil, there's lots of rules and regulations. You have to register with lots of public bodies. You need to request lots of permits and licenses as well. And a lot of that can take a long time. In general, they say it can take a month or longer. Now, it's possible to set up a really small business called microempresa, which can be pretty quick if you don't operate in one of these regulated industries. But apart from that, it can take a fair bit of time, and in general takes longer than setting up a business in Sweden, which they can take like 2 to 3 weeks, in the US 1 to 2 weeks. Obviously these are averages, and sometimes it takes longer, sometimes it takes less. So yeah, in general, in my own personal experience, it took longer to set up a business here in Brazil than it did in Sweden. And another thing is taxes as well, especially for companies, can be pretty complicated. So there's lots of different taxes for companies to pay. So just to mention a few, so there's IRPJ, IPI, there's ISS, there's PIS/COFINS, there's ICMS. So yeah, there's lots of different taxes. Now the Brazilian government is trying to simplify it, but even with the simplification, it's still going to be relatively complicated, especially with the sales tax or the VAT. So here in Brazil, you have specific rates for lots of different products, compared to Sweden and the UK, where you just have one rate that applies to the majority of products. So I think in the UK it's 20%, Sweden is 25% VAT, and that applies to most products. Not all, but most products. And so it's pretty easy for a company to calculate VAT in these countries, while in Brazil you've got this massive list of different rates. And sometimes the description of the products on the list isn't really easy to understand, and so you need to ask kind of a specialist accountant which of these rates apply to your product that your company's selling. So yeah, it's definitely not a simple process. And also for private individuals as well, it can be pretty complicated and time consuming to do a tax return, and that is because the tax return requires you to list out every asset and liability that you have. So you need to list out your properties, your car, all the shares that you own, all your bank accounts, any cryptocurrency you have, and you have to individually list out each one and what the value was when you purchased them. Now, there is no wealth tax as such that's calculated on this, but the Brazilian taxman wants to know all of your wealth, I guess to track how much it changes each year and so on. And this can be a very time-consuming thing. I remember when I moved to Brazil and I had to do my tax return the first year, it took so long because you have to list out everything. And then every year you need to update it based on if you've sold it or you bought some more. So yeah, it's not easy and quick. And then there's some other things as well. But yeah, I just wanted to do this video to show that there are certain things here in Brazil which are very efficient, very easy and quick to do, quicker and easier than in Sweden and many other countries. And yeah, I wasn't really impressed by some of these things when I moved here, but then there are some other things which still need to be improved. So I hope you liked this video. Please leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment in the comment section. So thanks for watching. Until next time.